They showed up at my door in fake uniforms, flashing plastic badges, and told me I was under arrest for breaking HOA rules. Imagine that neighbors peeking through their curtains, Karen smirking from across the street, convinced she finally had me cornered. But here's the twist she never saw coming. I'm not just another homeowner. I'm a federal agent, and the moment I pulled out my real badge, her little empire of lies began to crumble faster than she could scream for help. I never thought buying a house would turn into a battlefield. When I signed the deed for my small property on the edge of Cedar Creek, I was chasing peace and quiet. The lake shimmered at sunset, tall pines swayed in the wind, and the nearest highway was miles away. To me, it was perfect, a slice of freedom far removed from bureaucracy, rules, and noise. I chose this house precisely because it sat outside the authority of any homeowners association, or so I believed. The first sign of trouble was subtle, almost laughable. A letter slipped into my mailbox with the words Cedar Ridge HOA stamped in bold gold letters across the top. At first, I thought it was junk mail, some community newsletter, maybe even a scam advertisement. But when I opened it, my eyebrows rose higher with every line. It demanded that I register my property under the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association, comply with community standards, and of course pay monthly dues. A bold $250 fine was listed at the bottom for failure to maintain property aesthetics. I remember standing on my porch, reading the paper with the faint sound of crickets in the background, wondering if I was being pranked. My lawn was trimmed, my driveway spotless, my truck neatly parked. There was nothing unaesthetic about it. I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next week, the letters multiplied like weeds. $100 fines for unauthorized exterior modifications, $150 for excessive noise disturbances, $200 for failure to submit a landscaping plan. A landscaping plan? I hadn't changed a single thing since moving in. The grass was mowed, the porch was swept, and the only noise my property made was the sound of wind rustling through the pine needles. Each letter arrived crisp and official-looking, with the HOA's gold crest gleaming at the top. But the signature at the bottom always came from the same person, Karen Whitfield, HOA president. The name might as well have been stamped in blood. At first, I ignored the notices. I figured they would get bored and move on when they saw I wasn't paying. But instead, the harassment grew bolder. One morning, as I stepped outside with a mug of coffee, I found a figure standing in my driveway. A woman in her mid-50s sharp suit jacket, clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her lips stretched into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," she chirped, as though we were old friends. "Can I help you?" I asked, lowering my mug. She glanced at her watch, then at me, in a way that suggested I was late to her meeting. "I wanted to personally remind you about your outstanding violations," she said sweetly, plucking a paper from her clipboard and holding it out like a summons. "It seems you haven't submitted any payments yet." I didn't take the paper. Instead, I leaned against my truck, arms folded. "I'm not part of your HOA." Her smile never faltered, though her grip on the clipboard tightened. "Well," she said in that falsely polite tone people use when they're barely holding back their temper, "Cedar Ridge has certain expectations for surrounding properties. It's only fair that everyone contributes." I let out a humorless laugh. "Fair, let me make this real clear. I don't answer to you. You can stop stuffing my mailbox with this nonsense, because it's going straight in the trash." For the first time, her mask cracked, a twitch in the corner of her mouth, a flash of irritation in her eyes. But in a blink, the polished facade returned. "I do hope you reconsider," she said, adjusting her blazer. "You wouldn't want to make things difficult for yourself." I tilted my head, voice dropping. "That a threat?" She laughed lightly, the kind of laugh people use when they want to downplay their menace. "Oh, not at all. Just a friendly reminder that this community values cooperation." I stepped closer, lowering my mug. "Here's my reminder. If I see one more fake violation notice in my mailbox, I'll be filing a harassment complaint with real law enforcement." That got her. Her smile twitched, just for a heartbeat. Then she turned sharply, heels clicking against the pavement as she strutted back down my driveway. I watched her go, shaking my head. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The very next morning, I woke to find a pile of garbage dumped across my front yard, broken bottles, old fast food wrappers, rotting food scraps. The smell was rancid. A week later, my mailbox lay knocked over, bent at the base, like it had been rammed with a bat. At first, I thought maybe kids were playing pranks. But then I started noticing the stares, neighbors whispering behind drawn curtains, conversations halting when I walked by. It all came to a head at the gas station one evening. Old Mr. Jenkins, who had lived in Cedar Creek longer than anyone, leaned across his truck and gave me a look of pity. "Hope you get things sorted out soon," he muttered. "Sorted out?" I frowned. He sighed, lowering his voice. "Karen's been telling folks you've got legal trouble. Said you're one of those problem homeowners who dodges responsibilities. Even mentioned a warrant. A warrant. That was new." I forced a smile, nodded, and drove home. But inside, my blood simmered. She wasn't just harassing me anymore, she was poisoning my reputation. And sure enough, when I checked my mailbox that night, I found the most outrageous letter yet. Final notice. Failure to comply with HOA policies will result in legal action. Be advised that a warrant has been issued for your continued refusal to adhere to community guidelines. The letter was stamped with Karen's signature. I held it up to the porch light, staring at the fake legal jargon, the hollow threats. And I laughed a deep, genuine laugh that echoed into the night. Karen had just crossed the line. I should have known that ignoring Karen would only fuel her fire. Some people thrive on control, and when their grip slips, they tighten their claws until something breaks. Karen wasn't just one of those people, she was their queen. The day after that ridiculous final notice, she showed up again. I was tightening a loose hinge on my porch screen door when I heard the crunch of heels against gravel. I didn't even need to look up. The sharp rhythm was unmistakable. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, clipboard clutched like it was a weapon, lips curved in that smug smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "Mr. Walker," she called, her tone falsely cheerful. I set down my screwdriver, slowly met her gaze, and crossed my arms. "Something you need, Karen." She walked forward with deliberate poise, flipping through the stack of papers until she plucked one free. Holding it out like a sheriff's warrant, she said, "I wanted to personally remind you about your outstanding violations. You've ignored multiple notices, and it's come to the attention of the board that legal measures may soon be necessary." I didn't take the paper. "I told you before, I'm not part of your HOA." "Oh, but you see, Cedar Ridge Estates has expectations for all surrounding properties," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's only fair that everyone contributes. Otherwise, the value of our community suffers." I chuckled bitterly. "Fair lady, my lawn is cut, my truck is parked, and my property is clean. You don't get to invent rules and slap fines on me because you're bored." Her smile faltered for half a second, the muscles in her jaw tightening. She quickly smoothed it over, tilting her head like a patient teacher dealing with an unruly child. "I do hope you reconsider. You wouldn't want to make things difficult for yourself." There it was, the threat under the honeyed words. I stepped down from my porch, closing the distance between us, until only a few feet separated us. I lowered my voice, sharp as a blade. "That a threat, Karen?" She gave a breathy laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh no, just a reminder that this community values cooperation." I leaned closer, eyes locked on hers. "Here's my reminder. If I see one more fake violation notice in my mailbox, I'll be filing a harassment complaint with the sheriff. Not your fake legal department. Real law enforcement. Do you understand?" Her grip tightened on the clipboard knuckles, whitening, though her lips stretched back into that same plastic smile. Without another word, she spun on her heel and strode back toward the street heels, clicking against the pavement. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd back off. I was wrong. The very next morning, I woke to find a fresh pile of garbage dumped across my lawn. Rotten food, broken glass, and torn trash bags sprawled across the grass. Later that week, I found spray-painted letters on my fence, "Pay Yoop." My mailbox, already battered, was smashed in entirely. I started to notice the sideways glances from neighbors when I walked past. Conversations cut short the moment I approached. Whispers slipped out from behind closed curtains. At first, I thought it was paranoia, until I ran into Jenkins again, the old-timer who had always treated me with respect. "Rough time, huh?" he muttered as we stood by the gas pumps. "Something like that," I said cautiously. "What have you heard?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Karen's been talking, telling folks you're a troublemaker, that you're dodging dues. She even said there's a warrant out for your arrest." I blinked, stunned. A warrant. That was bold even for her. When I got home, sure enough, a new envelope was waiting in my box. This one wasn't just a violation notice. It was labeled "Final Legal Warning." The letter inside claimed a warrant had been issued for my continued refusal to comply with community regulations. It was dressed up with legal jargon, stamped with an official-looking seal, and signed again by Karen. I laughed out loud, shaking my head. The audacity of it all. A fake warrant. Karen wasn't just testing boundaries anymore, she was blowing through them. She thought she could scare me into submission with made-up charges and invented authority. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed, was that I had seen real warrants before. I had served real arrest papers. And this thing in my hand, it was laughable. No court seal. No judge's signature, no case number, just Karen's name scrawled at the bottom like she was queen of Cedar Ridge. Still, it rattled me not because I believed it, but because I realized how far she was willing to go. Letters were one thing, but slandering my name, spreading rumors, inventing legal documents, that was escalation. And with escalation always comes the next step. Sure enough, I didn't have to wait long. The following week, I stepped out onto my driveway early in the morning, stretching in the cool air, only to find two men standing there. Both wore matching uniforms, cheap dark blue shirts with patches that looked like they'd been ironed on at home. Each had a plastic badge clipped to their belt, the kind you could order online. Clipboards in hand, stern expressions plastered across their faces, they looked like caricatures of real officers. One cleared his throat. "Are you the homeowner?" I crossed my arms. "Who's asking?" The taller one straightened voice firm. "We're with the Homeowners Association Enforcement Division. We're here to discuss your outstanding violations." I almost laughed. HOA Enforcement Division. Karen had officially lost her mind. "Is that so?" I said calmly. The shorter one, stockier, puffed up his chest. "We have an active warrant for your arrest." My eyebrows rose. "You don't say." The tall one lifted his clipboard. "Per HOA code violations, you've repeatedly failed to comply with community regulations. We're here to bring you in." I let the silence stretch, studying them both. Their eyes darted nervously as if they knew I could see right through them. Then I smiled slowly. "All right," I said. "Let's see the warrant." The short one blinked. "You already got the notice number." I shook my head. "The real one. The one issued by a judge. Show it to me." They froze. "Well, the board issued it," the tall one muttered. "Oh, the HOA board issued a warrant." I nodded slowly, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, does the HOA have legal authority to arrest people?" Their silence was answer enough. That's when I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my wallet, and flipped open the leather case inside. The sun caught the glint of silver as I held it up between two fingers, my real badge. Not a piece of plastic, not something bought online. A legitimate federal badge that had opened doors most people never even knew existed. "You two," I said, my voice, low and deliberate, just attempted to detain a federal agent, their faces drained of color. The tall one's clipboard slipped from his hand, clattering onto the pavement. The shorter one stumbled back a step, eyes wide with panic. I tilted my head, watching them squirm. "Now I've got two questions for you. First, where's your legal authorization to conduct arrests? And second, would you like me to charge you with impersonating law enforcement before or after I run your names?" That was all it took. The tall one bolted, sprinting down the street, his shoes slapping against the pavement. The shorter one hesitated for a moment longer, then turned and followed, running like his life depended on it. I stood there calmly, arms crossed, watching them disappear. I didn't chase. I didn't need to, because in that moment I knew I had them. Karen had just made her biggest mistake yet. By the time the sun set that evening, I had already made up my mind. Karen had crossed the point of no return. Fines, rumors, even smashed mailboxes, I could have chalked those up to petty harassment. But sending two grown men to my property dressed like cops, that was impersonation, fraud, and intimidation rolled into one. And worse, it told me just how far she was willing to go. I sat at my kitchen table, the fake warrant spread out in front of me. My coffee had long since gone cold, but I wasn't drinking it anyway. Instead, I traced my finger over the bogus seal, the typed threats, the phony legal tone that someone like Karen probably thought sounded official. But I'd been around real federal paperwork, and this thing was a joke. No court docket number, no judge's name, no jurisdiction listed. And most damning of all, signed not by an attorney or judge, but by Karen Whitfield, HOA president. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so dangerous. Because here's the ugly truth about scams like this. They don't have to be airtight to work. They just have to scare people enough. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't her first target. If Karen had the gall to send fake cops to my door, how many other families had already been bullied into paying? That thought clenched in my gut like a fist. I opened my laptop, typed in the names I'd glimpsed on the cheap plastic badges the two men wore. They weren't hard to track. Within minutes, I had their so-called security company pulled up on a state registry. It wasn't even properly licensed, just a front registered to a P.O. box in town, and tied directly, no surprise, to Karen. Digging deeper, I found more. Complaint filings buried in county records, homeowners reporting harassment, mysterious fines, property liens that didn't hold up in court. One man had lost his house after refusing to pay HOA dues for a subdivision he technically didn't belong to. Another couple had forked over thousands in fees for alleged violations that never existed. Their stories followed the same pattern: letters, threats, escalation, then a knock on the door from fake officers. It wasn't random. It was organized. Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was running a full-blown extortion racket. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. My instincts told me to storm over there and confront her directly, to put her in her place once and for all. But instincts don't win wars. Evidence does. And if Karen thought she could scare me into silence, she'd just made the mistake of choosing the wrong target. Because I wasn't just some homeowner. I was trained to dismantle criminal schemes piece by piece. The next day, I paid a visit to the county clerk's office. The building was small, tucked between a post office and a rundown diner. A few curious glances followed me as I walked in, wearing plain clothes, carrying nothing but a notebook. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, looked up from her desk. "Help you with something? I'm looking into some property records," I said smoothly. "Cedar Ridge Estates." Her eyebrows shot up. "HOA business." I gave a non-committal smile. "Something like that." She sighed, muttered something under her breath, then began pulling files. What she handed me nearly made me whistle aloud. Stacks of disputes, foreclosures, legal complaints, all with one common thread: the rulings kept landing in Karen's favor. And then I saw his name, Judge Marcus Ellison, a local magistrate who had signed off on nearly every single HOA foreclosure request without question. I flipped page after page, each one screaming of rubber-stamped approvals. Homeowners forced out, properties seized, and every time Ellison's signature neatly at the bottom, either he was too lazy to do his job or Karen had him in her pocket. When I left the clerk's office, the air outside felt heavier. The smell of fried food from the diner clung to the street, but all I could think about was how deep this rabbit hole went. This wasn't a neighborly feud anymore. It was fraud, conspiracy, and judicial corruption, all hiding under the polite veneer of a suburban HOA. And Karen's smug and self-satisfied thought she was untouchable. That night, I walked my property line, slowly letting the cool air settle my thoughts. In the distance, porch lights flicked on one by one. Somewhere, a dog barked. From across the street, I caught sight of Karen's silhouette framed in her bay window, sipping wine as if she were royalty, surveying her kingdom. She had no idea her kingdom was built on sand. I decided then that I wasn't just going to stop her from harassing me. I was going to bring the whole operation down. But first, I had to be patient. I baited my trap with care. The following morning, instead of tossing her latest final notice into the trash, I responded. I drafted a letter feigning concern, pretending I wanted to resolve the matter quietly. I wrote that I was willing to discuss payment options, maybe even negotiate a reduced fine. It was the kind of response someone scared would send, the kind Karen would pounce on. And sure enough, 2 days later, I received a reply. Not from a court, not from any legitimate authority, but from the Cedar Ridge HOA Arbitration Committee. It wasn't a court summons. It wasn't even on official stationery. Just a typed email telling me to appear at an arbitration hearing to settle the matter once and for all. The location: a rented community center down the road. The warning: that failure to attend could result in further legal consequences. I almost laughed. She'd staged an entire fake trial, but I didn't laugh. Not outwardly. Instead, I smiled slowly because Karen had just handed me everything I needed. She thought she was luring me into her den. What she didn't realize was that she was walking straight into mine. And when this was over, the whole neighborhood would finally see her for what she really was: a fraud. The day of the so-called arbitration hearing dawned gray and overcast, the kind of weather that makes the world feel heavier than usual. Clouds hung low over Cedar Creek, and the faint smell of rain drifted through the air. It seemed fitting, like the sky itself was bracing for the storm about to unfold. I arrived at the Cedar Ridge Community Center half an hour early. The building was unimpressive, a square, windowless structure with faded paint and a cracked asphalt lot. The kind of place where bingo nights and PTA meetings were held, not legal proceedings. Yet inside, Karen had transformed it into her stage. When I pushed open the double doors, I immediately spotted her. She sat at the head of a long folding table, a clipboard in front of her, and this made me smirk, a cheap wooden gavel resting at her right hand. Behind her were 3 HOA board members in mismatched suits, fidgeting in their chairs, clearly trying to look official. Across from them sat 2 homeowners I vaguely recognized from around the neighborhood. Their eyes darted nervously, shoulders hunched as though waiting for a teacher's scolding. And then Karen saw me. Her lips spread into a triumphant smile, the kind of grin a predator gives when the prey finally wanders into the trap. "Glad you could make it, Mr. Walker," she said, gesturing toward an empty chair at the end of the table. I took my time, pulled out the chair, Saturday down, slowly folding my hands. I gave her back a smile, cool, steady the smile of someone who knows a secret the other person doesn't. Karen cleared her throat, tapping her clipboard. This arbitration is to address multiple outstanding violations on your property. You've failed to comply with Cedar Ridge guidelines, ignored payment demands, and disrupted the integrity of our community. Her voice carried like she was addressing a courtroom, but to me it was theater, bad theater at that. She launched into a list of fabricated charges. Failure to maintain property aesthetics, $250 fine. Unauthorized modification, sans fine. Excessive noise disturbance, $150 fine. Failure to submit landscaping plan, $200 fine. Continued refusal to comply, $1,500 fine. Total outstanding, $2,200. The board members nodded solemnly, as though she'd just read scripture. I tilted my head watching her. And what happens if I don't pay? Karen's smile widened. Then, per Cedar Ridge bylaws, the HOA reserves the right to pursue foreclosure actions. And given your repeated defiance, we're also prepared to escalate this matter to law enforcement. I pretended to flinch just slightly, enough for her to believe her words were sinking in. One of the nervous homeowners across the table glanced at me with wide eyes. They looked terrified. That's when I realized Karen had pulled this exact stunt on them. Maybe they'd even paid. Karen leaned forward, her tone softening into mock sympathy. It doesn't have to come to that, of course. If you agree to settle today, we can waive certain fees. All you need to do is sign here. She slid a paper toward me, her pen poised expectantly. The document was a joke, typed in bold font, no letterhead, no official seal. Just a list of invented violations and a space for my signature authorizing payment agreement and compliance. I glanced at it for a moment, then looked up at her, and if I refuse, her smile thinned. Then our enforcement division will have no choice but to step in. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. You mean those clowns you sent to my driveway with plastic badges? That caught her off guard. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. Our officers are fully authorized by the HOA to enforce regulations. I chuckled. The HOA doesn't issue arrests, Karen. Judges do. Real judges. Real law enforcement. Not whatever circus you're running here. The board members shifted uneasily. One coughed into his hand. Karen's voice grew sharper. You're walking a dangerous line, Mr. Walker. I suggest you cooperate before this becomes unpleasant. That's when I struck. I pushed the fake contract back toward her and stood slowly. Funny you should say that, Karen, because unpleasant is exactly what's coming for you. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me, I glanced at my watch, perfectly timed. Oh, don't worry, you'll see. As if on cue, the double doors behind me burst open. Uniformed officers poured into the room, their boots heavy against the linoleum. Real officers, sheriff's deputies, not rent-a-cops in fake patches. Behind them walked a woman in a dark suit, briefcase in hand, her presence commanding. Assistant U.S. Attorney Valerie Hughes. The color drained from Karen's face. The board members froze. One of them even ducked under the table in panic. Valerie stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. Karen Whitfield, you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, impersonation of law enforcement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She pulled a stack of documents from her briefcase and slapped them onto the table. We have overwhelming evidence of your activities, including falsified legal notices, harassment, and attempted illegal foreclosures. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Wait, no, you don't understand. This is all a misunderstanding. I crossed my arms, watching her crumble. No, Karen, we understand perfectly. You've been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, and now it's over. The deputies moved in, cuffing her hands behind her back. She thrashed, shrieking at the board members. Do something, don't just sit there. But the board members sat frozen, their faces pale. They weren't about to go down with her. The two homeowners across the table, her previous victims, stared in disbelief. One of them let out a shaky laugh of relief. Karen's voice cracked into hysteria as the deputies dragged her toward the door. This is all wrong. I was protecting the community. You'll regret this. The sound of her shrieking faded as the doors swung shut behind her. The room was silent for a long moment. Then slowly whispers rose, then cheers. For the first time since moving into Cedar Creek, the air felt lighter. Karen's empire of lies had finally collapsed, and she had no one to blame but herself. When the doors closed behind Karen and the officers, the silence inside the community center was deafening. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the room. Neighbors exchanged stunned glances, and for a moment no one dared to move. The board members sat frozen in their folding chairs, staring at the empty spot where their self-proclaimed queen had been dragged away. Then came the first whisper. She's really gone. It spread like wildfire murmurs rippling through the room as reality began to sink in. Two of the homeowners who had been sitting across from me leaned toward one another, their faces a mixture of shock and relief. I caught fragments of their conversation. "I can't believe it. After all these years. And she made us pay thousands." I stayed quiet, letting the moment breathe. This wasn't just about me. Karen had left a trail of victims, and now the pieces were finally falling into place. Assistant U.S. Attorney Hughes straightened the pile of documents she had dropped on the table, her eyes scanning the nervous board members. "For the record," she said firmly, "anyone involved in this scheme will be investigated. Cooperate, and it might go easier for you. Stay silent, and you'll share her fate." That was all it took. The tallest board member, a lanky man in his 40s with sweat glistening on his forehead, broke first. He raised both hands like a man surrendering on the battlefield. "I didn't know she was faking warrants. I just signed what she gave us. I swear." Another one, a woman with sharp glasses, snapped at him. "Don't you dare throw this on me. You voted for every one of her proposals." The room descended into finger-pointing and accusations, the fragile alliance that Karen had built shattering in seconds without her to hold it together. I almost felt sorry for them, almost. Valerie Hughes, on the other hand, didn't flinch. She scribbled notes calmly, her pen scratching against paper. "Save it for your attorneys. You'll each be receiving subpoenas soon." As the deputies escorted the remaining board members out one by one for questioning, I stayed seated listening. I wasn't just here as a homeowner. I was here as a federal witness, and every detail mattered. One of the homeowners, the nervous man who had been sitting across from me earlier, suddenly turned, his voice trembling. "She made me sign over my shed," he confessed. "Said it violated community guidelines. She threatened to foreclose on my house if I didn't." His eyes darted toward the door where Karen had been taken. "I thought she had legal authority." I nodded slowly, my stomach tightening. His story confirmed what I had suspected. Karen's operation wasn't just about bogus fines. She had been systematically stripping property from vulnerable homeowners, using fear as her currency. By the time the last deputy left the room carrying stacks of seized documents, the community center felt like the aftermath of a storm calm, but with debris scattered everywhere. I walked outside into the humid air, the clouds still heavy above. Police cruisers lined the street, red and blue lights flashing against the darkening sky. Neighbors had gathered in small clusters, whispering, pointing, some with cameras out, recording the spectacle. The scene was surreal. The mighty HOA president who once strutted through the neighborhood with absolute authority was now stuffed in the back of a squad car, her shrieks muffled by the closed door. For the first time, people weren't afraid of her anymore. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, but this time my laptop screen glowed with possibilities. With Karen in custody, it was time to dig deeper. I combed through public complaints, financial records, even social media groups where residents vented about HOA issues. The picture grew clearer with every click. Families who had paid thousands in violation fees just to avoid being dragged into fake hearings. Elderly couples who had been bullied into selling their homes for pennies under the threat of foreclosure. Properties flipped and resold to HOA-friendly buyers, with Karen taking a hefty cut. It was theft disguised as governance. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. Karen wasn't just a bully with a clipboard, she was the architect of an organized crime ring, and she had manipulated everyone around her into believing she had real authority. But I also realized something else. She hadn't acted alone. Judge Ellison's name appeared again and again, rubber-stamping foreclosure rulings without question. Every time Karen filed paperwork, his approval was automatic. Either he was grossly negligent or he was complicit. That was a bigger problem because it meant this went higher than the HOA. It meant Karen had corrupted part of the legal system itself. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Taking down Karen was only step one. Now it was time to dismantle the machine that allowed her to thrive. The next morning, I met Hughes at her office downtown. She was already 2 steps ahead of me. Boxes of evidence sat stacked against the walls, each labeled with a homeowner's name. She gestured toward them as I walked in. "Karen's been busy," she said grimly. "Extortion, mail fraud, wire fraud. She's looking at federal charges. But this judge," she tapped a file on her desk, "if we can prove collusion, he's finished too." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you need from me? Testimony? And any connections you can uncover? You've got the background for this, Walker. You see patterns others miss." I smiled faintly. She was right. I'd spent years building cases against criminals who thought they were untouchable. Karen and her cronies were no different. Over the following weeks, I worked closely with Hughes and her team. Every day brought fresh revelations, fraudulent liens filed under forged signatures, fake arbitration hearings designed to intimidate families driven from their homes under the guise of community standards. The scope was staggering. But the real smoking gun came when we uncovered bank transfers money funneled from the HOA's account directly into an offshore fund controlled by Karen and unmistakably Judge Ellison. That was the nail in the coffin. With that evidence, Hughes secured a federal warrant for Ellison's arrest. When the news broke, the neighborhood erupted. People who had once whispered behind curtains now gathered in the streets furious and vindicated. Karen had been bad enough, but a corrupt judge. That shattered what little trust remained in the system. Through it all, I kept my focus. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for justice, not just for myself, but for every neighbor Karen had tormented. The night before Ellison's arrest, I stood on my porch looking out over Cedar Creek. The lake reflected the moonlight, calm and steady, untouched by all the chaos that had unfolded. For the first time since I moved here, I felt something close to peace, but I also knew this wasn't the end. Taking down Karen had exposed a deeper rot, and if there's one thing I've learned in my career, it's this. Once you shine a light on corruption, you'd better be ready to follow it wherever it leads. And I was ready. The morning Judge Marcus Ellison's name hit the news, Cedar Creek felt like it was vibrating. For years, this town had lived under Karen's thumb, but now people realized she hadn't just been a power-hungry neighbor, she'd had someone on the inside, someone who turned her fantasies of control into real damage. A judge signing away homes without question was worse than anything the HOA president herself could have dreamed up. I sat on my porch sipping coffee when a knock came at my door. It wasn't hesitant, it was deliberate, steady. When I opened it, Assistant U.S. Attorney Valerie Hughes stood there, sharp as ever in a charcoal suit, her briefcase tucked under one arm. "We've got him," she said without preamble. I raised an eyebrow. "Ellison," she nodded. "We have bank transfers, testimony, forged paperwork with his initials, and multiple homeowners ready to speak out. He won't be able to talk his way out of this." "Good," I said, stepping aside so she could enter. Because if Karen was the flame, Ellison was the gasoline. We sat at the kitchen table, and she laid out the plan. The arrest would happen the following afternoon at the county courthouse, timed so that the press would be present. They wanted the community to see it. They wanted every homeowner who had been bullied, fined, or evicted to know the system wasn't invincible. But there was more. Valerie leaned forward, lowering her voice. "We need you to attend one more meeting," she said. I frowned. "Another hearing?" "Not exactly. The HOA board, what's left of it, has called a special session tonight. They're panicking. We have reliable intel that they're planning to destroy records and move funds before the subpoenas arrive." I smirked. "So you want me to bait them again?" Her eyes glinted. "You've already proven you're good at that." I didn't argue. This wasn't about ego, it was about ending the racket once and for all. That evening, the so-called special session convened in the same community center where Karen had been arrested. The atmosphere was different, though. Gone was the smug confidence, the pomp of fake gavels and plastic badges. Instead, the remaining board members looked like cornered rats whispering nervously as they shuffled papers. When I walked in, conversation stopped. One of them, a balding man with a nervous tic, glared at me. "What are you doing here?" I shrugged casually. "Got an invitation, didn't want to miss the fireworks." The woman with the sharp glasses adjusted her frames, her voice tight. "This is a private board meeting." Private, I let the word hang in the air. Funny considering half the neighborhood has been footing the bill for your scams. Their faces paled, but none of them spoke. Moments later, the doors opened again, and Valerie walked in, flanked by 2 deputies. The board members scrambled, stammering protests, but she silenced them with a single sentence. "This meeting is now under federal observation. Continue by all means." The balding man sputtered. "This is outrageous. We're just discussing community affairs." Valerie dropped a folder on the table with a loud thunk. "Community affairs don't involve offshore bank accounts." The room fell silent. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching their world collapse. For years, they had hidden behind Karen's shadow, letting her take the heat while they signed whatever papers she shoved in front of them. But now, with Karen gone, they had no shield. Valerie pressed further. "You have 2 choices. Cooperate with this investigation and hand over every document or face charges alongside her. Fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, mail fraud. Pick your poison." The man cracked first, just like I knew he would. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. "She said it was legal," he muttered. "She said the judge approved it all." "Karen said a lot of things," I replied coldly. "And you believed her because it was easier than asking questions." The woman with the glasses tried to salvage her composure. We were following bylaws. Breach of bylaws doesn't involve sending fake cops to someone's house, I cut in. My voice carried enough bite that she flinched. Valerie signaled to the deputies who began collecting files from the table, stuffing them into evidence boxes. The board sat there helpless, watching the foundation of their little empire vanish, piece by piece. One of the homeowners from earlier, an older woman with gray hair who must have heard about the session, slipped quietly into the back of the room. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. She pointed a trembling finger at the board. "You made me sell my house," she said. Her voice cracked, but the fury in it was unmistakable. 30 years I lived there. You said I owed dues for a neighborhood I wasn't even part of. I sold everything because of you. Her words hit like a hammer. The board members squirmed, some looking down at the floor, others shifting in guilt. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about paperwork or legal jargon. This was about people's lives. Families uprooted, reputations, destroyed homes stolen under the guise of community standards, and Karen had orchestrated it all. By the time the deputies loaded the last evidence box, the board looked broken. Valerie stood, her expression unyielding. "This association is finished," she said. "The federal government will ensure restitution for every victim. As of tonight, Cedar Ridge HOA is officially under dissolution." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. As we walked out into the night, I felt the weight of the past months begin to lift. The street was quiet, porch lights flickering on across the neighborhood. For the first time, it didn't feel like people were hiding behind their curtains. They were watching openly now, hopeful, cautious, but free of the fear Karen had instilled. Valerie turned to me at the curb. "You did good work, Walker. Most people would have caved long before it got this far." I shook my head. "I didn't do it for me. I did it because bullies like her only stop when someone pushes back. And sometimes the law needs a push too." She smiled faintly. "Well, you've certainly given us one hell of a push." As her car pulled away, I stood there for a moment, letting the cool night air wash over me. Cedar Creek wasn't healed yet, but the poison had been cut out. Karen was in jail. The judge would face his reckoning tomorrow. And the HOA, her twisted weapon of control, was nothing but ashes. I thought back to that first letter, the ridiculous fine for failure to maintain property aesthetics. How simple it had seemed then. How close I'd come to just ignoring it, hoping it would go away. But if I had, Karen would still be ruling this neighborhood with fear. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real lesson here. Freedom only survives when people are willing to stand up for it. And I was just getting started. The next day, the courthouse in downtown Cedar Creek became the stage for the final act of this drama. I arrived early, blending into the crowd that had already begun to gather. Word spread quickly in small towns, and the arrest of a judge was like dropping a grenade into a pond. Ripples reached everyone. Reporters with cameras clustered by the steps, microphones in hand, their voices competing for sound bites. Homeowners who had been victims of Karen's scheme stood in small knots, their faces tense, waiting to see justice play out. I adjusted my jacket and watched silently. For me, this wasn't about spectacle. It was about closure, about making sure the people who thought they could twist the law for their own gain finally faced the real thing. At precisely 10 o'clock, the courthouse doors swung open. Judge Marcus Ellison stepped out, flanked by 2 federal marshals, his once commanding posture sagging under the weight of handcuffs clamped around his wrists. The man who had sat so smugly behind a bench for years, stamping foreclosure orders without a second glance, was now just another defendant shuffling toward a waiting car. The crowd erupted. Some jeered, others clapped. A woman near the front shouted, "That's for my brother's house, you crook." A man with weathered hands raised his fist and yelled. Finally, Ellison's face was pale, but his jaw was tight, like he still believed he could talk his way out of this. Reporters shouted questions as microphones stretched toward him. "Did you take bribes from the HOA? How long have you been working with Karen Whitfield? Do you regret signing those orders?" He kept his head down, refusing to answer, but the damage was already done. His legacy was finished, his authority shattered in public view. And for the first time, the people of Cedar Creek felt the system leaning back toward them instead of crushing them underfoot. I stayed on the courthouse steps until the marshal's car disappeared down the street. Only then did I exhale long and slow, feeling something release in my chest. It wasn't victory. Justice isn't about winning. It was relief. Relief that the nightmare was ending. But not everything could be fixed overnight. Later that afternoon, Valerie Hughes called a town meeting in the same community center where Karen's fake hearings had taken place. This time, though, it wasn't staged intimidation, it was the truth. The room filled with residents, some angry, some curious, some simply exhausted from years of living under the HOA's shadow. Valerie stood at the front with a microphone, calm but firm. Boxes of evidence lined the wall behind her, stacked high, labeled clearly. She began with the facts: Karen's charges, Ellison's arrest, the official dissolution of the HOA. Murmurs rippled through the room. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was the first confirmation that what they had endured hadn't been paranoia, it had been real, and it had been criminal. One elderly man stood, his voice shaking. "So, what happens to us now? What happens to our money, the fees we paid, the homes we lost?" Valerie nodded. "Every fraudulent action taken by the HOA is under review. If you were fined, if you were forced to sell property, if you paid dues illegally, there will be restitution. It won't be immediate, but justice is moving in your favor now." That brought a round of applause, tentative at first, then growing louder. I stood near the back listening. I wasn't here to take credit. My badge, my background, that wasn't the story the community needed to hear. What they needed was hope that this nightmare wouldn't repeat. Still, when Valerie gestured toward me, calling me out as the neighbor who refused to be silenced, dozens of heads turned my way. For a brief second, I felt the weight of every eye in that room. Some filled with gratitude, others with respect. A few even had tears. I gave a small nod, not saying much, but the message was clear enough. I had stood up, and they could too. After the meeting, people approached me. A woman clutched my arm, whispering, "Thank you." She told us we'd lose everything if we fought back. A man shook my hand, firmly muttering, "About damn time someone knocked her down." It was humbling. These were good people, families, retirees, workers who had been manipulated into thinking they had no choice. Fear is a powerful weapon. Karen had wielded it masterfully. But fear only lasts until someone refuses to play along. That night, Cedar Creek felt different. For months, maybe years, this town had lived under a fog of intimidation. Now porch lights glowed a little brighter, and voices carried openly across lawns instead of whispering behind closed doors. Kids rode bikes down the street without parents watching nervously from porches. It was subtle, but undeniable. The air was lighter. I sat on my porch again, staring at the still waters of the lake. The pines rustled softly in the evening breeze. For the first time since moving here, I felt the peace I had sought in the beginning. But peace isn't permanent. I knew that. Corruption doesn't vanish, it adapts, hides, waits for weakness. Maybe not here, maybe not tomorrow, but somewhere else, another Karen, another Ellison would try the same playbook. And when they did, I hoped the people they targeted would remember what happened in Cedar Creek. That one person refusing to bend could unravel an entire empire of lies. Because bullies only win when the rest of us stay quiet. As I finished my coffee, I heard laughter echo from a neighbor's yard. Real laughter, unguarded. And for the first time, I let myself smile. Karen's reign was over. Ellison's power was gone. The HOA that had ruled through fear was nothing but ashes. And Cedar Creek, my home, was finally free. The weeks after Judge Ellison's arrest felt like watching a forest slowly come back to life after a fire. At first, everything seemed scorched. Neighbors still carried the scars of intimidation, and conversations often circled back to what Karen had done. But gradually, the community began to heal. One Saturday morning, I walked down Main Street and noticed something I hadn't seen in months: people smiling openly. The old diner had a line out the door, kids were licking ice cream cones on the sidewalk, and a group of retirees were arguing about fishing instead of HOA fees. Life was returning to normal, or maybe to what it should have been all along. Of course, Karen wasn't around to see it. She was sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial on charges that could put her away for decades. Fraud mail, fraud wire, fraud impersonation of law enforcement, conspiracy, the list seemed endless. And from what Valerie Hughes told me every day, more victims were coming forward, each story adding another nail to her coffin. Ellison, too, was done. His name had been stricken from the courthouse roster, his once proud office stripped bare. He faced his own set of federal charges, and no amount of lawyerly charm could save him now. The HOA itself officially dissolved. Its accounts frozen, its bylaws shredded, its reputation in tatters. A judge, not Ellison this time, but one with integrity, signed the order that finally killed the monster Karen had created. But justice has a way of echoing. The aftermath spread beyond legal documents and courtrooms. Families who had been forced out of their homes started filing lawsuits, reclaiming what was stolen from them. The money Karen funneled offshore was being tracked down, and slowly, bit by bit, restitution funds were forming. For the first time, victims had hope of not just moral justice, but financial relief too. One evening, as I was repairing the broken fence at the edge of my yard, a fence Karen's enforcers had once vandalized, my neighbor Jenkins ambled over. The old man leaned against the post, his cap pulled low against the setting sun. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, his gravelly voice tinged with awe. "Karen in cuffs. The judge, too. You did this. He shook my head. I didn't do it alone. She dug her own grave. I just refused to lie down in it. He chuckled softly, eyes crinkling. Still, you lit the match. Folks round here needed someone to remind 'em. Bullies only got power if we hand it to 'em. His words stuck with me. The next week, the town council, not the HOA, but the legitimate municipal body, organized a community gathering by the lake. It wasn't official business, just a chance for neighbors to breathe together to mark the end of an era. As the sun set over, Cedar Creek lanterns floated on the water, each one representing a homeowner who had been wronged. Some floated for families driven out, others for money stolen. A few heartbreakingly for people who had passed away before seeing justice. Watching those lights drift across the dark surface, I felt a lump in my throat. Valerie was there too, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. She didn't make a speech, didn't take credit. She just observed, her expression soft. When our eyes met, she gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply the absence of fear. That night, as I walked home, I realized Cedar Creek wasn't just free of Karen, it was stronger because of what it had endured. Neighbors who once barely spoke now checked in on each other. Strangers who had shared the same struggle now swapped stories like old friends. Out of the ashes of fear, community had been reborn. As for me, I finally had what I came here for: peace. The sound of the wind through the pines, the quiet lap of water against the dock, the freedom to live without someone scribbling fake violations against my name. But I also carried something new. A lesson etched deeper than any scar Karen tried to inflict. Power doesn't always come with a badge or a title. Sometimes it's fake, propped up by lies, intimidation, and the silence of others. But real power, the kind that lasts, comes from standing firm when someone tries to scare you into submission. Karen never understood that. She thought control was the same as strength. She thought fear was the same as respect. And in the end, her empire collapsed, because fear always shatters when truth walks in the room. Looking out over Cedar Creek now, I know this much: people will always try to invent authority where they don't have it. There will always be another HOA Karen, another Ellison, another bully in a suit. But so long as there are people willing to stand up to call their bluff, to remind them that fake power isn't power at all, they'll never win for long. And if nothing else, this town will remember that lesson. Because we lived it. At the heart of this story lies a lesson bigger than one corrupt HOA president or one crooked judge. It's about recognizing the difference between authority and intimidation. Karen built her empire on fear, convincing good people that her fake fines and bogus rules were law. And for too long, neighbors stayed silent because silence felt safer. But true safety doesn't come from keeping your head down. It comes from standing up. In life, you'll meet your own Karens, people who thrive on control, who twist rules to suit themselves, who try to bully you into submission. Remember this: their power only exists if you believe it does. Stand firm, ask questions, demand proof. Because when truth walks in, lies collapse. So tell me, have you ever faced a Karen in your own life? Someone who tried to intimidate you with fake authority? Share your story in the comments. And if you want more tales like this where justice triumphs over fear, make sure to subscribe. Your voice matters.